Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third day of the NIC.br Annual Workshop on Survey Methodology on Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Data Production. This series of webinars is jointly organized by the Regional Center for Studies on the Development of the Information Society, Cetic.br, linked to the Brazilian Network Information Center, NIC.br, and the National School of Statistical Science, linked to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, IBGE. My name is Alexandre Barbosa, and I'm the head of Civic.br, and I'm very pleased to be here today with you, and I will moderate this webinar today. This special online edition marks the 10th year anniversary of this workshop, and we are very happy to announce that we have more than 590 participants that have registered for this year's event. In the two first days, we had an average of 220 online participants following the debates. And before we start, I would like to give some very brief announcements before we begin. All these 5 days of webinars are being recorded and will be made available throughout later and through our event website. You are most welcome to ask questions to speakers through the Q&A box. So we highly recommend that you can interact with speakers through this question and answer box. The webinar is being delivered in English, but we also have simultaneous translation that is being offered into Portuguese. And finally, please check your email for guidelines on the webinar certificates for those willing to have a certificate after this webinar. Well, in the first day of this webinar series, we had an important discussion on how to promote a more human rights-centered and ethical approach to artificial intelligence. In our second day, that was yesterday, we had a very interesting debate on how to measure the potential contributions of AI for innovation and productivity in companies. And in this context, we had presentations on the development and implementation of AI policies, also I'll talk on the OECD AI Observatory and on the OECD's guidelines to produce public statistics on AI. Then we had interesting presentations on practical experience of producing official AI-related statistics by National Statistical Office from Canada and Israel. So this was what we had in the first 2 days. And as for our topic today, it is important to highlight the fact that in face of the rapid advancements and adoption of emerging digital technologies, individuals are increasingly being exposed to AI-based application. And as a result, I think that we need to bring to the policy debate issues such as the development of digital skills and digital media literacy, so that citizens can make a critical use of information, especially in these times of COVID-19. We have such a lot of misinformations, and we need to have proper answers to questions such as how citizens can better read, interpret, and understand the language surrounding the data, in particular statistical data. They see every day a lot of data in media. So how can they really understand this information? And also, how can we make the language of data understood and communicated effectively by all? So those are the questions that we have to bring to our debate in these days of information society. And we can say that the lack of data literacy and related skills is, in my opinion, a factor excluding many citizens from the digital society, holding back the large multiplier effect of ICT as an important means of democratic citizens' participation. This is what we are going to discuss today under the topic of statistics for citizenship. And we will begin with a keynote presentation, and then we are going to invite two different speakers on this topic. Our speakers will have a chance to address questions from the floor. So please don't be shy and put your questions on Q&A box. And to open today's webinar, I'm very pleased to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Alan Smith, who is the head of visual and data journalism at the Financial Times in the UK. Previous to the Financial Times, Alan was with the Office for National Statistics, also in the UK, where he founded its winning data visualization center. And Alan has made amazing data visualizations on the UK census data, for instance, and now in the Financial Times, making amazing things where he writes the Financial Times popular chart doctor's column. So without further ado, I would like to invite Alan that will have 45 minutes. Alan, thank you very much for your presence again with us in this workshop. You have the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Alexandre. It's wonderful to be able to connect with you all. Obviously, this current crisis has made all of these conferences and events that we like to attend very different. But I'm really thrilled to be with you and for hundreds of you to be in my bedroom with me today as well, perhaps. I'm really looking forward to talking about some of the things that Alexandre mentioned. I'm going to do that really through a tour of some of the work that we've been doing at the FT this year, and hopefully you can now see my screen rather than me in my bedroom. This will get more interesting because of that. Yeah, I mean, we have, Alexandre is right, I spent nearly 20 years working as a civil servant in the Official Statistics Office in the UK, and then moved to the Financial Times about 5 years ago. And even that move from official statistics to journalism is, I suppose, traditionally a very unusual move, but I think it's a very interesting observation that a career path from official statistics to journalism is now a viable option because these worlds are becoming much closer together. And that's particularly because of the rise of what is termed data journalism, which I think is a term that many of you will be familiar with. But it's also still a term that we struggle to define in the world of journalism. What do we really mean by data journalism? And particularly in the context of this crisis, you know, what role can data journalism play using statistics to inform our readers about the rapidly changing events that we're seeing in the world right now. So if I pick up on this theme of what do we really mean by data journalism, I'm going to use the example of this cat in the tree, because about 10 years ago, I was talking at a conference in Australia where I asked Ross Gittins, who is the economics editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, and I said, "Oh, Ross, do you have data journalism in Australia?" And he smiled and said, "Yes, Alan." He said, "We definitely have data journalism in Australia now." He said, because instead of saying in the newspaper that the cat got stuck up the tree, we now report how high up the tree the cat was. And he was very cynical, I think, about the early emergence of data journalism, in that it was a fixation about just throwing numbers into stories that didn't particularly reveal insight, but that conveyed some sort of spurious kind of precision in reporting in the quest for authority. And in fact, I think it's easy to say that there's still a lot of this sort of treatment going on in the world of the media, not least of which at the FT. I mean, this is a very, very early graphic in January that was up on the FT's website about the emergence of coronavirus in China. And this was an on-the-day graphic as China reported its latest cases. And to be honest, this is not particularly insightful, right? Like, you're just getting the tick of numbers, the tick of deaths. There's not a huge amount of insight that we can gain from these graphics, other than that there is a virus that is spreading. And what we really want to think about is, how can we use data, how can we use statistics, how can we use data visualization techniques to bring information really to our audience. And we very early on in the crisis decided that what we really wanted to do was produce a hub that we could use to bring all of the information that we were collecting from across my team of data and visual journalists, from our own reporters networks, and that we would bring this information together into a single place that we would allow our readers to explore. Now, this page originated in February, and it has gradually evolved as the crisis has moved from Asia to Europe, to the US. This page has been evolving with it as we've understood more about the crisis. And I guess one of the early distinctions that I would make here is that we are no longer looking at a news story. We are looking at a product, a data product, essentially. And in its latest incarnation, so this is it with Latin America as the center of the pandemic. If you go to this page now, you'll see we have a big series of data visualizations that are describing the sort of evolving crisis. So this is looking at the mortality toll as far as we're able to, links to excess mortality, international comparisons, government responses, the stringency of government responses, links to more in-depth reporting on some of these topics. And also, I think probably fairly unusually for a news story, obviously when you have so much data in a product, we're starting to become much more transparent on explaining to people where that data comes from. Now, obviously to people working in official statistics, that might seem like a very self-evident thing that you want to do. In the world of news reporting, explicitly linking to data sources like this is still a relatively new thing. And so what we've really got to make sure we're doing here is that we are making the routes through to, so we're interpreting data in ways that are useful to readers, but also starting to make it an audit trail for people to be able to come back to things. So if I return to the presentation here, let me just return back to the full screen. If I return to presentation mode here, what we have is a series of data visualizations that we were working on early on in the crisis, which for us seemed to be a good way of trying to explain the trajectory of this virus and the disease that follows it, and how different countries were doing in response. And so very early on, we produced a chart here, which is a chart of the rolling average of coronavirus deaths in different locations around the world. And you can see here we've got some interesting things going on in this chart. Rather than a traditional date axis, we have an axis that's allowing us, it's the number of days since 3 daily deaths were first recorded. So it's trying to account for the fact that countries hit the crisis at different moments. And also, if you can see on the y-axis, this is using a log scale treatment on the y-axis, because we felt that the rate of acceleration of the crisis was the thing that we really wanted to focus in on here, so that you could start to see, you know, the comparisons using a log scale would be more effective for that sort of, for epidemiological data of this sort. Now, early on, we were aware that some of these graphics might be more complex than graphics that people might be used to seeing in the news. and in particular things like log scales. And I think this whole crisis has been a very interesting experiment in understanding how people read information. So, for example, this very interesting research from LSE came out shortly after our charts to say that the public do not understand logarithmic graphs, that it do not bother, do not waste your time. People do not understand logarithmic scales on charts, which I think it's valuable information to know that people struggle sometimes with understanding nonlinear scales. But I think also there's a challenge here, which is to make sure that we educate people on the difference that those scales can make and why we want to use them in certain instances. And I'd actually already written an article in my FT column in the Chart Doctor saying, you really need to understand why we use log scales sometimes. And in this example here, which is a chart of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, if you don't use a log scale, you can hide the Wall Street crash, right? Like that, this is a huge issue, and that just simply accepting that people don't understand log scales is not good enough. We need to be doing as much as we can to educate people. And we need to make sure that we do as good a job as we can of explaining the information in our graphics. We don't want our graphics to be more complicated than they need to be, but we also can't strip them down to make them too simple so that they run the risk of oversimplifying the information that we're trying to show. So educating our readers has been a big kind of challenge for us, not just this year in the crisis, but also in the last few years in general, since we really started to take data visualization very seriously at the Financial Times. And Alexandre, in his very kind introduction, mentioned that I write a column at the FT called The Chart Doctor. And just to show you that we explore all the various corners of data visualization, this is another article that I wrote for The Chart Doctor, which looked at how could we use data sonification techniques to represent financial information, which might seem a very, very strange thing to try and do. But I'm going to play a very short excerpt from this video and then explain a little bit more about what I was doing here.
Please do.
So what we have here is an animated chart that I step the readers through how to understand the financial information in this animated chart. And then when it's animating, what we actually do is map the y-axis. So the y-axis here of the interest rates, we map it to a musical scale. And I'll stop talking for a minute and just let you listen to some of this.
Consider them very, very important. Every recession in the US since World War II has been preceded by one of these inversions. Because the yield curve changes on a daily basis, tracking it over time can be difficult. And one of the things that we can do is we can use animation to show us what's happening on a daily basis. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the yield curve to animate from 1979, and you can see that 5 days animating per second here. So we get a sense of how the yield curve changes over time. If I speed that right up, you can see that actually the yield curve is very, very active, particularly at the shorter end of the yields. There's a lot of movement. With the yield curve animating so quickly, it can be difficult to remember how it's traveled over time. So one of the other things that we can do is introduce some ghosting of outlines from these peak inversions. So we can remind ourselves of where the yield curve has been at different points. So you can see here, October 1979 was an inversion 3 months before recession, and similarly in 1980. This generates an animation of about 3.5 minutes, and it's eerily silent. So could we actually use the data to produce sound as well as a visual? And that's where this process of data sonification comes into play. And what we're going to do with sonification is we're going to take the y-axis, so that's from 0 to 15% on our yields of our bonds, and we're going to map that into a 4-octave scale of musical pitches. And if I take the yield curve back to its regular shape, and we introduce the sonification element, you get to hear what it might actually sound like. You see that that's the rising pitch. As the yields rise, so does the pitch. And that's an upward ascending arpeggio that represents a fairly regular yield curve. And going back to the different shapes of the yield curve that we looked at earlier, we can start to hear what they sound like. So the flatter yield curve sounds pretty much as you would expect. It's the same notes repeated again and again because they're more or less identical yields. And then for our inversions, so those are the points where the short-term bonds are the highest, then that ripples downwards. And in the case of this inversion from 1980, you can notice that the overall pitch of the yield curve is higher because the yields are very high. They're up at 15% at this point in time.
I'll stop that there, but you might already be thinking, why is this crazy English guy making music and sound out of data rather than just making the chart? Well, one of the things that was really interesting about this project was realizing that there are places where data visualizations don't travel very well. For example, we are increasingly now in a world where a lot of devices with internet access don't actually have a screen. So we're thinking about voice interfaces, about podcasts, about audio products. So this is potentially a route to bring data into new data presentation into new environments. But the second thing also is that I went to New York Public Library and met with the head of assistive technology, who, the thing that you need to know about her is that she is blind, and she drew this chart from listening to it, which for me was a really amazing moment in realizing that we are in this golden period where we can use computational technology, data visualization techniques, web development libraries to produce really interesting new interfaces to data. And so we want to continue to understand that there is certainly some learning to do about the history of data visualization, but that there's still very much a future to look at as well. Going back to the coronavirus charts, one of the things that we realized very early on is that we have a big global audience who all want to see their view of the data that we are publishing. And that, for my sort of opinion, is that is really where we start to discuss the need for making data interactive and for making data deeply personal. So in the current versions of our famous log scale charts, they are actually interactive, and they allow the reader to determine what is being displayed on screen. And that's not necessarily just the country data that we see on these charts, but it's also the settings of the charts. And the one thing that I will say is, whenever you have a graphic or an interactive graphic like this that is deeply interactive, one of the things that's lovely about it is that you can make the URL customized. So if I click on this link now, it will open me up in the web browser to recreate this exact view of the data. So we're going to make a comparison of UK and Brazil 7-day rolling average of new deaths on a log scale. Okay, so if I click on that, this will take me to the page, and lo and behold, there is the view of the data that we were just looking at. Now, if I change this and start introducing other countries, that information is also expressed in the URL. So the URL will allow us to capture the information that we're looking at, as well as allow us to adapt the chart. So this is the bit where we show readers, what does the difference between looking at a log scale and a linear scale look like? What does that really look like? I'm just going to hide the other countries there. We can get rid of Argentina. And of course, we're making now a very, very interesting comparison between the trajectory of Brazil and the UK. This is the axis that we were looking at before, the number of days since 3 average deaths. We can change that and make it a pure date term. So that gives us April through to October. We're looking at the raw numbers, but of course, raw numbers are quite good when you're in the early stages of a pandemic. But actually, as that process goes through, it might be more helpful to look at it expressed in terms of per million citizens, so that we allow people to see the difference that these parameters make to what they're seeing. And you can see each one of these views offers us a new insight on the data. And that, I think, highlights something very, very important about data visualization, which is that every individual visualization that a reader will see is a compromise. There is no such thing as a perfect chart here. Each one is focusing on something at the expense of something else. So very, very important that when we use interactivity, that we use it in the correct environment. And just returning to the presentation here, that level of interactivity has been incredibly important for us because it's the only way that we can serve a global readership in a topic like this, where everyone wants to look at their data, their views, and to anticipate what you're doing. And that's what we've done, is we've produced a whole series of these graphics that allow people to compare and to in some senses, start to ask questions about, for example, their own country's handling of the pandemic. In the UK, there's been tremendous discussion about this huge increase in excess deaths this year that we've experienced. Those figures don't necessarily tally exactly to the official COVID deaths. Excess deaths was a metric that we used to enable international comparison. And actually, in the process of compiling this information, I think there was something very interesting that came out, which is that we spent a lot of time collating and compiling data from different organizations across the world and bringing it together into an environment that allowed us to visualize, to be able to report on it. And so actually what we've done as part of that process is made that data available publicly through the GitHub website. So all of the data that we use in our excess mortality charts is now publicly available on GitHub. And I think that's, for us, has been one big difference between what we've done in reporting with data on this crisis and what we would do, for example, with traditional financial reporting, where we would actually use fairly trusted sources of data, either from official statistics agencies or from other organizations where, for example, there are harmonized international standards, right? Like, and that actually pulling together and making international comparisons is not as difficult as it is with something like coronavirus. So the Financial Times as a data publisher, that's something relatively new from the crisis. That's not something we've done an awful lot of before, but it's something that we think does two things. It makes the underlying data available, and we think that that's an important data, but also it allows people to interrogate and to scrutinize what we have done. Because of course, you know, we are working at pace here and trying to do the best job that we can in reporting the progress of the virus, and we're trying to make it clear to people how we're doing that. So I mentioned earlier, you know, we moved from this situation of just pure kind of storytelling and the kind of use of data and graphics as part of traditional newspaper narratives to product management, and that increased demand from other journalists for our help. So we have people at the FT, we have reporters, great reporters who cover lots of different topics. It could be the science correspondent, it could be one of our European political correspondents, it could be covering any kind of beat that we cover on the FT. But what we're finding is that the database that we had compiled for our coronavirus reporting became a central hub for our other journalists. So if they wanted to seek authoritative information to include in their own reporting, that was a new way of working with our team and a new role for our team. The other thing that it brought, of course, is increased scrutiny from our readers. You know, our readers are very keen to understand what we've been doing, to try and learn from it. But also, if they see something that they think we've done that isn't right, they'll let us know. And we certainly will enter into a discussion with them if that's the case. But we've also realized that that readership can be a great source of keeping ourselves up to date on different sources. So on the interactives, what we've done is actually said to our readers, look, please help us improve these charts. We're looking for further sources of national or municipal mortality data. Can you please help us? Because this stuff doesn't all exist in one place. It really doesn't. And so we asked people, if you know of something that we should be using, please tell us. And this is just a glimpse of the email inbox, the dedicated email that we used for that purpose. And if you just have a little look at it, that we had received hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of responses from all over the world, many of which delivered us really interesting new sources of mortality data that we had previously been unaware of. And also some interesting discussions about the treatments that we gave that data and how we harmonized them and so on. The visualizations themselves that we make for our readers are guided by something called the visual vocabulary. This is something that we developed at the Financial Times in the last 3 or 4 years. It's effectively a visual thesaurus for data. It is the thing that we use to help us decide how do we want to present data based on the story that we're trying to tell. And the most important thing about this product is not to admire all of the wonderful shapes and colors on it, but to look at these information relationships in the top of this poster. What are you really trying to show here? Correlation, ranking, distribution, change over time, and so on. This is really about statistical thinking and about starting to understand the relationship in the numbers that you're trying to show, and using that as a way of driving the design process. So for all those people who wonder and struggle about, oh, how do I make beautiful graphics from my data? This is the start of that conversation. It's not meant to be a wizard, right? Like, you should still have a conversation, you should still have an argument. You know, there's lots of different ways of doing things, but it's a way of designing with data rather than designing around data, right? Like, and what we've been trying to avoid is becoming data decorators, you know, like to try and use cute visual treatments to cartoonify or to make our content appeal to readers. We don't think we should be doing that. We think the interesting thing in our graphics should be the data. And so we will focus on choosing the right kinds of graphics to showcase it. We think that this is very much an international language. We use this. You can download your own copy of this poster. It's a big poster. You can just print it and put it on your wall. You can download a copy of the poster from ft.com/vocabulary, and that will take you to the GitHub website where you can download the PDF. It's completely free. You don't need to have an FT subscription or anything. And we have translated it into multiple languages. We have Chinese and Japanese. We've got Spanish now and French. I was amazed to find actually that in France, a pie chart is called a camembert. Which came as a little bit of a surprise, but just generally we have found this to be a very useful international language for us, which translates very well into different audiences. And so when we are faced with a data set and the challenge of knowing how to produce it, we use the visual vocabulary to help us identify. So for example, these two graphics that you can see on screen right now. So there's a graphic on the left, this heat map here, and a graphic on the right, which is this animated map. They are both showing exactly the same data, which is an index produced by Oxford University on the stringency of government interventions during COVID-19. So the darker the color, the more stringent the government action is in terms of restrictions on socializing, financial stimulus packages, on schools and shops opening. It's an index to capture the overall stringency of those measures. And it's a data set that is updated daily. And of course, you know, your challenge is how do we visualize that data? And this is a good example of where working with something like the visual vocabulary comes in handy, because our solution to this problem was to produce the two charts because they focus on different relationships. The map focuses on the spatial relationship, and in fact the spatial temporal relationship. So you can see in January there is a big spatial pattern early on in the pandemic in the move from Asia to Europe to North America and then to Latin America, Africa and beyond. But it's the spatial relationship that's really being captured by that map. On the left-hand side here, this heat map is a very clever way of showing the change over time, because the animation, well, it does show you change over time, but it's very difficult to remember and to compare when something's animating. On the left-hand side, this graphic, this is the one that you would want to use if you were purely interested in analyzing and scrutinizing that temporal aspect of the data, because every country is aligned in order on the x-axis, and so it allows us to read down the chart to make the comparisons about who was first, who was late, and so on. And so our whole data visualization output during the coronavirus period has been very much informed by the work that we've been doing in the last 2 or 3 years about how to show different types of data. These are chord diagrams that are showing us the changes in airline traffic during the crisis and how they had changed over time. That we'd used different techniques for showing magnitude changes in the stock market, scatter plots to show correlations on infectious diseases, simple ranking charts to compare death rates, different charts to try and show the kind of volume, the kind of magnitude context of coronavirus and how that sat alongside other previous viral epidemics and pandemics. Considering complex relationships like flows and how they've been affected during the crisis using these diagrams called Sankey diagrams. Using maps that are not really maps to show geographical information or patterns in geographical spread. So this graphic makes a very key point about how China managed to contain the outbreak to one province, whereas the US didn't. And the absolute geography is not too important here. What's really, really important is the relative sizes of the provinces to each other. Traditional line charts, absolutely still a vital part of what we're doing. We don't want to make graphics more complicated than they need to be, but even simple line charts need good clarification and context. So we're looking here at China's steel inventory this year, and the thing that we were trying to show here is just how far 2020 steel inventory has shot up because of the fall in consumption and how far it's taken that inventory away from the regular bounds of industrial activity. So simple annotated line charts, absolute staple here. The most important thing here has been just the use of color to show what's context and what's actual data that we want our readers to be looking at. We also spent several of our projects have involved looking at academic research and understanding how to bring academic research to a wider readership. So with this paper, a very interesting paper looking at levels of uptake of contact tracing apps on smartphones, how that might affect the daily infection rate after lockdown. For us, this is really crucial stuff. This is research on the back of the crisis that's trying to understand an evolving pandemic and trying to bring some sense of how important some of the different government measures are to our future health, which absolutely vital for more or less all of our readers to get a feel for. We also use data from many other sources than traditional sources. So this is data from Google Maps, looking at the footfall index, historical averages versus recent days to try and understand. This is basically how busy UK parks were once people were able to go out and use parks, and it showed us that there was this big spike in footfall in parks, which is not just a recovery but greater than the historical average. So parks were even busier than before the coronavirus crisis. Similarly, volumes of data that we had to work very, very hard to distill into meaningful graphics. So this is effectively the volume of flights, the total number of international flights by airport crunched into a 2-stage animation that just compares January and April. So that's 3 months apart. That's effectively what happened to global flights. And again, cartography becoming really important there when the story is spatial. We'd also tried to use different techniques for tracking impacts on the financial and business world, because this is a core part of our readership. And again, just becoming more comfortable, our readers becoming more comfortable with consuming information in a slightly different form than what they might be used to. very kind of standard treatments now. These are for the FT, which is vital for us. And I think it means that we've moved on our visual journalism because we've helped to boost our readers' chart literacy. And I think we now have significant evidence that this is a huge part of the FT's appeal now. Before I go on and talk about the next stage of our visual journalism, the other thing I ought to point out is that we knew that our visual and data journalism would be really important in this crisis, but that's definitely been borne out by reader response and reader engagement. And the tracker that I showed you first of all, the overall coronavirus tracker, is now the most popular web page in the history of the Financial Times, which I think says a lot about the importance of this story, but I also think it says a lot about the importance of our graphics and our data to that story, which I think has been tremendously rewarding for the team. Visual journalism isn't just about charts either, and data graphics. It can also cover all sorts of other explanatory information. And in particular, we're lucky to have some really great visual artists in my team who've worked again with people like our science editor to create really very interesting explanatory infographics, many of them based on scientific papers and academic journal articles, but trying to distill them in a way that that makes our readers feel that they're not reading an academic article. And in particular, this one on how far droplets travel was one of our most popular charts of the crisis on Instagram. Just understanding fundamental information like this. This was based on some work at MIT. This is the sort of thing that people really reacted to very, very well. So I just want to finish off really by saying that we found that graphics have become incredibly important to our readers. They were already important before this crisis. They have become only more important since. One of the things that we did on the FT recently on our homepage, you can see here, these are all of our traditional desks at the top. World, UK, companies, tech, markets. These are all the desks that we normally have at the FT and we have had for many years. We've added graphics as a dedicated option up here just as a test, and given people the ability to search our graphics. So you can type in, say, coronavirus and get a chronological feed of all of the graphics that we are publishing related to the topic that you're searching for. And that, again, I think one of the things that's been interesting about this is understanding that through this mechanism, the graphic can be the first thing that a reader sees about a story. So here you see the graphic first, and then you have the option to click to read the rest of the story. And this is taking some sort of things that we've learned from social media about the charts that we produce to be able to be their own story, to be like what I would call a micro story. So you can see here, in my world in official statistics, the title of this chart would probably have been what is now the subtitle here, UK trade in different food groups 2018, right? So that is it's important information. We need to know what is being shown here. But for us now with our charts, that information is not enough. We need to make it clear what the chart is showing and what the narrative purpose of showing you the chart is. So this is different from when you're, say, a researcher and you're using charts and graphics in a sort of diagnostic and exploratory space. You're auditioning charts to interrogate your data and to understand patterns in the data. What we're doing here is, once we're clear what it is that we're trying to show, we're trying to incorporate that statement into the chart. And one of the values about that is it turns this graphic into something self-contained. You do not need to read the rest of the article to understand this particular graphic. But if you're interested in a topic, click through to read more. That's the kind of model that we are really trying to follow with the graphics. So I am well aware of time, and that takes us to 2:45. I thank you for sharing your time with me and allowing me to talk at length about some of the treatment. I suspect there might be one or two questions, so I will stop screen sharing and return to the call.
Alan, thank you very much for this very interesting and, of course, a very inspiring presentation. For me, I'm sure that your work has indeed a great impact on data journalism and also visual journalism. I think that more than ever, it is really important to face the challenge of teaching people how to read and interpret data. So I would say that for us data producers, as we are here at Cetic.br, your talk is always inspiring and give us a lot of insights. I wish we could have more time to be with you, but now I would like to give the chance for the participants. By the way, we have now 184 participants in the room. We have a lot of questions. I will try to get some of them, Alan, because indeed we have a lot of questions. Let me take 3 questions on data literacy and also statistics literacy. We have one question from, they are basically the same, but Camila Lima asked, think about data and statistics. Any ideas on how to improve data literacy for the public and statistics literacy, given that statisticians and data scientists have been developing more and more complex methodologies every day to fulfill the needs for timely and more disaggregated data. The next one has to do with the same topic from Winston, how to communicate and educate users about data, survey data and its particularities, such as margins of errors and limitation to disaggregation. This is indeed a good question, in my opinion. We have another one in the same topic regarding the fact that, from Leonardo, regarding the fact that people have several difficulties in understanding charts, and that it is important not to keep charts too simple. What can you do to make things easier to the audience as data producer, data product producers? What strategies do you have to keep information complete and easy to understand at the same time? So this has to do with literacy and how to teach users to read statistical data.
Yeah. Okay, they are all fantastic questions, and I think what I'm going to do, my response will be some FT articles to show you specific elements of some of the questions that have been posed there. Just one general point from before my time at the Financial Times, and I think it was one of the things that led to me joining the FT, was the work that we've been doing at the UK Statistics Office Agency, was that we expanded our work to deliberately try and connect with a different group of people to the regular audience of an official statistics agency. So official statistics agencies for decades and decades have decided that the people they need to connect with are policymakers, decision makers, you know, these are people and analysts, you know, like, so that's been the core audience for a lot of statistical agencies. What we did a few years ago at ONS was decide, well, let's try and talk about citizens, right? Like, and talk about citizens who just might be interested in understanding a bit more about the world. And you realize that they need a different type of content. They really need to understand things in a context that makes sense to them. So making data and statistics personal was almost as important as making it visual, right? Like, so visual, personal, and social is probably a very good combination of things to do when you're connecting with a wider audience. And so I always said to the people at ONS, I think you're selling the website wrong. I said, you know, statistics.gov.uk, I said, that's 2 of people's least favorite words in one URL, right? Statistics and gov, right? No one is going to come there voluntarily. I said, if you said, this is the website where you can learn how long you're likely to live, or what your own personal inflation rate might be, or how does your life experience compare to the other people that you work with or live with, or kind of, you know, just that personal angle in trying to understand statistics is incredibly important. I'll move on to talk about the 2 specific things that some of the questions there focused on. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. The first thing was about how do you display uncertainty, for example, in survey data, and kind of how do you convey that message to people? Well, I have a very strong opinion that the answer to doing that is not to just put an error bar on everything. I think the answer to it is to visualize the uncertainty when it's an important part of what you're trying to convey, right? And so here's an example. This is from a few years ago, and I felt terrible here because this was an article that I worked on that was trying to explain why you shouldn't trust ONS immigration figures. And having just left ONS, I felt terrible. I felt like I was cheating on my old girlfriend or something. But this was to talk about uncertainty in immigration estimates. And this is quite an important topic because the immigration figures in the UK are effectively generated via a survey that was designed to capture tourism figures. And so it's really not fit for purpose. And so what we wanted to do was to explain how the survey was constructed, how many people they survey, and then crucially for things like the confidence intervals, we decided to use completely different techniques from error bars. We just tried to show people like, you know, this is an animation of the range of uncertainty, right? Like that you could get from the same survey, right? Like to try and give people a sense for how the uncertainty in the data really affects the top line number that you hear. So this for me was really important. I mean, we very often get criticized for not focusing on uncertainty in things like survey data. And it's not because we don't think it's important, but what we think we need to do is to really give it a proper treatment when it's a part of what we're trying to convey. The second question about sort of chart literacy, I think, and how do we bring people along? Here's my top tip, right? I had a big argument at the FT really about whether we should publish, whether the FT reader was ready for this graphic, right? And it's a really complicated graphic in some ways. And the first time you see it, you might think, oh, wow, you know, like I'm never going to read this. First thing I will point you to is there's a thing here that says how to read this diagram, how to read it. And it says this outer section is just a pie chart. It just shows you the total value of acquisitions from each region. And this chord connects the two-way flow, right? So this is the value of North American acquisitions of European companies. This is the value of European acquisitions of North American companies. The crucial thing here is it explains that the color is the dominant relationship, right? So what that means is that in this case, North America has acquired more from Europe than Europe has acquired from North America. Well, look at China. All of its chords are red here, right? So that means that China is winning in its trade relationship with everyone else. And so this is quite an important graphic because what we refused to do was simplify the data. The underlying data here is a matrix. It's an origin destination flow data set that's very rich. And if you spend 5 minutes reading it, you will be smarter, right? And I said to the editors at the FT, let's have a look at the comments. Because readers can comment. This is a big difference between the newspapers and the official statistics agency. And the first comment was not particularly encouraging. The first comment was, that diagram is horrible. And we have 5 people there who recommend that comment, so who liked that comment. But then further down here, we've got somebody else saying, actually, fantastic charts, shows effective visual representation of quantitative material. The chord chart gets my vote for chart of the year. And you can see here we've got 24 people who have recommended that comment. Now, my point here is the ratio of people who hated the chart to who liked the chart. If every 5 FT readers love it and 1 FT reader hates it, that ratio of 5 to 1 is almost perfect because it means we are pushing our readers a little bit. There will always be some people who feel that every graphic can only be a pie chart or a line chart. You know, I can't do anything for them. But for the rest of them, if they start to see that understanding and learning those charts will help them become smarter, then that's what we're trying to do. And of course, the big difference here is the next time those readers see a chord chart, they'll think, I know how to read. I know how to read it. And I think that's a big difference in the data literacy, because everyone learns pie charts, line charts, and bar charts when you're at primary school. When do you learn your next chart in your academic journey? The answer for some people is never. And we switch it off at like age 10. So we are trying to make up for lost ground. Yeah, great. Sorry, it was a long answer, but they were great questions.
Yeah, excellent answers. And of course that data users feedback and readers feedback is always very insightful. Huh? So thank you for that. We have another question from Shan Hong from UNESCO in Paris. She congratulates you and asking, UNESCO is supporting journalism and media on harnessing AI to improve the quality journalism. Do you have any suggestions on the good practice of Financial Times to be duplicated with more media? What are the challenges and lessons learned to adopt data and visual journalism in Financial Times? So it has to do with best practice and how to spread these good practices.
I mean, it's a really good question, because one of the things I would hate people to go away from this talk thinking is that this is just all about technology, right? Like, and if you throw the latest data visualization technology at your data set, that your problems will be solved. I think what we actually have here, the big challenge with both AI and with techniques like data visualization, finding new audiences, is that this is a really big change management challenge, right? You are trying to be an agent of change in organizations that maybe not necessarily have historically embraced change very well. And so I think you need to be very smart to understand what is the currency of success in the organizations that you work in. What does success look like? And to start to target that success with your interventions, be it AI or data visualization or anything. And at the Statistics Office in the UK, there was a big change in this success criteria, I think about 10 years ago. If I went back 20 years ago, success would probably be no one complains, right? That would be success. I did my work and no one complained. I think that's no longer good enough for success, because of course the easiest way to say that no one complained is to make sure that no one looks. And what we really want to do is the success criteria should be that actually some people do complain because it's part of the debate. And what we're trying to do here is inform the debate and to try and get foment some change here. So I think it does vary from one organization to another. And I wouldn't think you could just take what we have done at the Financial Times, copy it and turn it into something for another organization. But some of the thinking about how do we influence the change, right? Like, so my poster is called Visual Vocabulary. You know why we use the word vocabulary? Because everyone at the FT, the currency is words. And so if you have a grammatical, if you convey the grammatical value of the visuals, then people start to appreciate its purpose. But that's a very Financial Times angle, and it might be different in other organizations.
Thank you very much, Alan, for sharing this. Very interesting. Well, I have 4 questions. I will read them all, and you try to maybe summarize, because in my view, they are very important. One is related to disinformation. So from Manuela Ribeiro, in your opinion, what is the role of data journalism to combat fake news and disinformation? And the other one, or a couple of questions on data quality and trust from Isabella Coelho. I'd like to ask about the quality of data collected from different countries, how to assess and verify the sub-notification, how can citizens trust in data, and then one from Fabio Seni. During COVID-19 outbreak, there was a huge debate in Brazil regarding the quality of administrative data provided by federal and local governments regarding cases and death. Several researchers tried to estimate the level of underreporting in the country and how data visualization can deal with the lack of data, of bad quality data. And the very last one, I promise, is related to accessibility from Tatiana. What best practice should be used in data visualization to ensure that the content is widely accessible, including for persons with disability? So we have one question on quality, disinformation, and accessibility. If you can sum up this.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, what brilliant questions. You know, like everybody, that is a great set of questions. You're a very tough audience. So firstly, I mean, I'm going to talk about quality. And this is an area where we are very careful at the FT and mindful of what is within our control in terms of quality and what we need to be aware of when we come to report on data. I think the crisis itself has generated an enormous debate about the quality of publicly available data. I mean, even this week in the UK, the Public Health Organization admitted that they had missed 18,000 cases by a spreadsheet error, that they had been using the old format of Microsoft Excel to compile information, and it had lost its data when it went above 65,000 rows. And so for weeks, we have been reporting this data in good faith from the Public Health Organization of England, only to find that that there is now a big revision to that data a few weeks down the line. So one of the things that we do is we make sure when we update those main tracker products that I said to you daily, we look at them every time we refresh them from the data feeds. We use the visuals to look at, is there something unusual in here? Like, is there a spike that shouldn't be here? Like, using visuals to actually QA data is a great idea. And if there is, we will go in and retrospectively investigate and edit that data and republish it. But we obviously are reliant on data providers who we think we should be able to expect good quality data from being able to provide it, right? Like, and so we will avoid data providers that we feel don't have credibility. We won't just take anybody's survey data. We always have PR agencies offering us survey data, and, you know, no thank you. But I think the crisis has generated a broader question, which is about statistics agencies. A lot of them have a model which is 50 or 100 years old. It's about producing monthly and quarterly survey data. Economic statistics to a particular schedule. The moment you have a crisis like this that comes up where there's a big information need, some of the existing mechanisms are great. And I think there will be plenty of investigation into that. I think the question about accessibility is a very good one, because the first point I would say about accessibility is something that does not pull in one direction. There are lots of different accessibility requirements. You could think about the different accessibility needs of someone who is deaf compared to someone who maybe have visual impairment. They will have very different needs, or someone with a cognitive impairment might be different to someone with a fine motor impairment. And so with accessibility, you have a very, very broad group of users to consider. And we think things like the visuals have helped us with some accessibility requirements. So some people with cognitive requirements have benefited an awful lot from the visuals. But of course, people with visual difficulties, well, it's much more difficult. So the experiment I showed with audio was a sort of investigation on that. We take it very carefully, seriously. We work very carefully with things like color palettes to make sure that we have accessible color blindness compliance. We try to keep things like minimum type sizes on graphics. Alt text to describe graphics is very, very important when you're publishing graphics on the web. So we do take it seriously. It's difficult to meet all of the requirements all of the time with just one form of journalism, but we do our best.
Thank you, Alan. Maybe I will take one more question. There is one that I guess will be easy for you. Alan Barreto is asking how to access Financial Times graphics data. Can you please advise us?
So actually the graphics page is free to read. So ft.com /graphics, that's free to read. So you can view and search FT graphics on that. And also the coronavirus tracker that I showed, that is also free to read. You don't need to be a subscriber to the FT to read that page. So for the things that I've shown today, most of that is free to read. And if you just Google it, you'll be able to find a link to the stories or the pieces that you want. But if you really love it, then subscribe, because that's what helps keep it good.
Thank you so much, Alan. We have more questions, but unfortunately, we have no time. And what I'm going to do is invite you to come to Brazil next year, and all these questions can be replied face to face. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us today, Alan. Amazing presentation. And I'm sure that you are really impacting data producers like us. So across Atlantic, you have really influenced the way that we produce and visualize data from our project surveys, etc. So once again, thank you very, very much. And with that, I would like to now take a 5-minute comfort break and resume shortly with a session on data literacy and data journalism and other things that I'm sure you will also enjoy the two coming presentations. Thank you. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We are back for our round of presentation on statistical education and public statistics for citizenship, data literacy, data journalism. We will now have two invited speakers, follow also by a 15-minute Q&A session. So please be encouraged to take note of your questions throughout the presentations and share them with us through the Q&A box. To begin this second part of our session today, I would like to give the floor to Professor Denise Brits do Nascimento Silva, who is Principal Researcher and former Director of the National School of Statistical Science, ENCE. She has also worked as a Principal Methodologist for the Office for National Statistics in the UK and has lectured at the University of Southampton, also in the UK. And she's the president of the International Association of Survey Statisticians, IASS, and an elected member of the International Statistical Institute. Professor Denise, it's my great pleasure to welcome you in this workshop. Thank you so very much for being with us today. I will give you 15 minutes or so, 15 to 20 minutes. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. Is it okay? Are you listening to me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So I will share my slides, my screen, and we'll start. So good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, everybody. First, I would like to thank you, Alexandre and NIC.br, for this partnership with the National School of Statistical Science, and also for the opportunity of being here, not only for joint organizing the workshop, but the opportunity to talk. This session, we value it very much, and I thank Alan Smith for his fantastic talk and for all this opportunity of learning from him and continue with this discussion that we have today. I will say that my focus here is about statistical education and public statistics for citizenship. And I will say that in this puzzle, in this jigsaw, that you have all this graphic literacy and data literacy and AI literacy and statistical literacy, I'm back, I will have at my talk, I would say I'm back to basics or almost bare necessities. So just to start, let's see the contours, what's going on. So what I'm listing here are things that you already know, that you are in an era of data deluge and information explosion, that there is the artificial intelligence race and all the developments and all the benefits and all the risks of this time. We have been involved in social media, and social media is transforming the world, and even more dangerous is changing how we govern and how we are governed, and that there is a complex relationship between social media and democracy. And that's the risks that I would like to talk about. You have been living, if all of that was not enough, we are living in a pandemic mode world in this year. And also the pandemic was not the only thing that has shocked the world this year. So what I would like to talk about is the relation between statistical literacy and democracy and public statistics and democracy. So all that we have been seeing during this workshop is the use of data and information to improve lives and also to change lives for the bad or for the good. And one of the things that I want to advocate is that data understanding and to transform data in information, it's really a challenge, and is a challenge that you need to face. And you have to have education for kids, education for youngers, and education for adults, and education for school teachers, and education for graduate lecturers to use data to challenge all these numbers that are being shown in order to see if we are being misled or if you are understanding our society. So the idea here is that I want to highlight is that we are not only looking for numeracy or literacy or only for statistical literacy, but I want to advocate, and I'm not alone, so I learn from others, that what we need is data literacy, and one of the things to understand statistics about society. That is our power. That's what we need to do. So if you go nowadays and you see that all these components of literacy that we have been talking during these 2 days, and we will be talking for the next 2 days as well, is information literacy, data literacy, statistical literacy, critical reasoning, visual literacy that we just had before, and technology literacy that Sasha has talked to us in the first day. I will focus in data literacy and statistical literacy. So the idea that I want to promote here or to highlight is that we need not only statistical education, but we need statistical education in topics and related to issues that will allow people to understand the society. So it's understanding society that should be our focus. Especially in this, now in this era of where, although we have a lot of quantitative information, we also had a lot of people fighting against science and education and information and changing the way information is presented or data is presented to misrepresent evidence. So what I'm talking here, it's as I want to talk about civic statistics. So the word civic statistics, the first time I read it in a paper, I thought, yes, that's what I want that's how I want to call it. It's civic statistics, it's information, it's statistics about society. So what I want to highlight and keep you informed about is that we need to improve not only the way that we teach or we educate about statistics and maps and data, but also to be able to relate it to society. So once I saw a poster from a department of social sciences in a university, and the poster had a dinosaur, and it was written there, science can tell us how to revive a dinosaur, and social sciences can tell us how dangerous it is. So what I'm trying to say that you have to be able to get this information and use this information to understand society, to become informed citizens. So, and I learned this, and I'm not alone because there are projects around the world doing it. So there is this Engaging Civic Statistics. This is a project from International Association of Statistical Education. And there is also this other website of Engaging Civic Statistics, a call for action from the United Nations. And you have to put all of this together with the SDG agenda. And the idea is that in order to empower citizens, we have to understand, and the children and the youngers and the ordinary people have to understand as much as possible about quantitative evidence, related to migration, demography, crime, employment, poverty, social and economic issues and phenomena. So if you don't do this to kids and young people, we will keep, we will need to do to adult education. So we already have a backlog. We all know that how things are. We need to educate, we need to improve adult education, ordinary people to understand data and statistics and the society. But if you don't do something for the young people in this generation, they will be the adults that will be need to educate literacy and numeracy and data in the next 20 years. So the idea is that we can't solve all the world, all the things. It's a never-ending story. I feel like I'm drying ice. We keep drying ice, and that's okay. We will keep doing it, but we will keep doing it without forgetting that we can help to solve or to mitigate the problem in this cohort. So then we'll have less adults needing this support in the future. However, statistics about society is a multivariate phenomenon, and we need to deal with aggregate data. We need to do dynamic data, collect and present it over time, like Alan showed us. And the statistics about society I presented in tests or computer-mediated tools. So let's do something and engage with civic statistics for young people, school teachers, undergraduates, and university lecturers. And I put here university lecturers because you all know how many university courses we have where people learn about maths or even statistics, but they don't put together the statistics and the society issues. And I will get my more 4 or 5 minutes that I may have just to show 2 initiatives from the Statistical Office in Brazil and also from our school, the National School of Statistical Science. We understand that these 2 things are drops in the ocean, but we want to show you our nice drops. So the first one is IBGE Educa, and its facts is a part of our website in the Central Statistical Office in Brazil, the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, that is devoted to children, to adolescents and young people, and also to school teachers. And also in our statistics course, we have a degree in statistics in our school, and our first degree in statistics, we have a core discipline in public statistics to do exactly the things that is to teach about concepts of data, statistics, information, and statistical information as an instrument of knowledge and action. So here, what we have is our website from IBGE Educa, devoted to education in the Central Statistical Office in Brazil. And you see that there are parts that are devoted for kids, parts that are devoted for youngers, and the part that are devoted for teachers. And in the area that are devoted for young people, it's written information about country and population to learn and participate. And I'm showing here one of the links and one of the websites, the part of the website, and we are proud that we managed to give a lot of information about social phenomena. So we have information for the young people about racial inequalities in Brazil, or about what a statistician do, ICT statistics, and also gender statistics. So we are investing in helping the young people to understand society. The other role that we also have in the National School of Statistical Sciences is that we are part of the UN Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training. So there is one of our courses there. And also, a very important role that we have a capacity building role for the public service in Brazil with our virtual school. So these are all some examples on how we can put together the knowledge of statistical literacy, data literacy, and also social sciences and geography and economics to make all this information available for different public, for different environments and different publics. And the other thing is, if you go also for the website of NIC.br, you will also, it's not presented here, but there is also some nice examples for how to use the internet. They are devoted for children and for young people. So it's also making it as an instrument of people being able to use widely the net for understanding society. So it's not on a slide here, but I'm sure you will find in the NIC.br website. So my talk, it's really short, but it's just to add this dimension to the discussion that is the need for educating our society in civic statistics, so they will be able, when adults, to read the Financial Times blogs. So you have to, mitigate this distance, diminish this distance. So that's my final remarks. It's a very short contribution, but I want to make it short so we can discuss. Is the need to include civic statistics in statistical education and in data literacy and in data education. And the most important thing is the understanding of the statistics about society that is vital to inform citizens. And I believe we can do it. You can do together. And that's why I wanted to raise these issues in this forum that is a wide open forum with different people working in different dimensions of this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Denise, for this insightful presentation, and you did make a great contribution. I believe that you have tackled a crucial aspect that we need more educated citizens to know how to use civic statistics. This is crucial for democracy. So congratulations on this initiative that you just shared with us. It is indeed very, very important, especially in these times and in our country. I will now invite the next speaker in the interest of time. I would like to invite Natalia Mazzotti. Natalia is a Brazilian journalist and expert in open government, data journalism, and women leadership. Natalia is a JSK fellow at Stanford and former executive director at Open Knowledge Brazil, and she led winning civic technologies projects, advocacy campaigns for open data and development, and has developed the biggest data journalism conference in Brazil. So Natalia, I'm very happy to welcome here once again in our workshop. You have been with us a few years ago. Thank you very much. And you have the floor. Thank you. Your microphone is on mute, Natalia.
What about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can. Go ahead,
okay,
please.
Okay. Thank you, Alexandre. Thank you, Tatiana, and our Cetics team for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be part of Cetics Annual Workshop. And as I'm going to talk about a topic that is quite related to the topic that Denise brought us, which is how to fight data deserts and bring some cases to discuss this issue. But firstly, I want to share with you a bit more about my connection with this topic. And before joining the JSK journalism program as a fellow, I was leading since 2017 the Brazilian NGO Open Knowledge Brazil, which works with advocacy and technology to foster civic participation, data literacy, and transparency in Brazil. And prior to that, I co-founded and led Gênero e Número, Gender and Number, which is a news startup that uses data to tackle gender inequities, and also School of Data, which is a data literacy program that focuses on training journalists and activists to more efficiently deal with the data that they have. So in these initiatives, I had to deal with a constant issue, which is the lack of data. And as co-founder of Gênero e Número, and during the time I was leading this initiative, we had to deal with the fact that a lot of data producers understand gender data as a sensitive data and not release gender data. So this was one issue. But also while I was in this role, leading Gênero e Número, I gave some trainings, and one of them was in Venezuela, where I taught data-driven journalism techniques for a group of female journalists. And also I participated as a mentor in a hackathon to promote data-driven projects. This, in the photo, this is the group that was with us in this hackathon, and I was mentoring a part of this group, and they had an interesting problem. They wanted to understand and report on the dimension of homicides in Caracas, which is, as we know, one of the most violent cities in the world. But the challenge was that they didn't have reliable data from the government. The government figures were way below the real casualties, and the journalists started a methodology and using a collaborative form to collect the figures themselves in morgues and hospitals in Caracas. This project later on won the most important data journalism award, and also inspired me to think about this real issue of what I called data desert. What is data desert? It's a consistent lack of official data, either because local governments won't regularly track public policies, or also because powerful people think it's better not to measure what's going on around them. And I could observe a similar issue when I was in a project in a favela in Rio de Janeiro. I was leading a project called Data Lab, and the citizens didn't have any data about basic sanitation to demand public policies from the local authorities in this community. So as part of a School of Data, I developed together with another NGO called Observatório de Favelas in Rio de Janeiro, this project called Data Lab, which aims to close the gap between those who have the technological skills to use the data available, and it is still restricted to a very privileged social group, and those who do not have these skills. So in one of our first experiences, we trained 5 young leaders from favelas in Rio de Janeiro in the basic principles of data journalism. And each of them had the opportunity to create a personal data visualization project about their communities. And in the second year of the initiative, this group started a project called CocoZap, which is the one that you were seeing in my screen right now, to gather data using crowdsourcing, using the community to understand the points where they have problems with basic sanitation. So this is also a very inspiring project to me. And while I was executive director in the Brazilian chapter of Open Knowledge, among different projects, we had Serenata de Amor, this project that I'm showing. And this project uses artificial intelligence to make sense of a huge amount of data on parliamentaries' expenses and use this data to foster social control on public money. And this project quickly became one of the most successful civic tech projects using public big data in Brazil. So the project uses technology, of course, but technology is not the goal. It's just a way to engage people in a topic of public interest, such as public expenses. I will give more details about this project later on, as it is a good example of the challenge of gathering data to foster social control in the municipalities, at the local level. And also this project made me think more deeply on this issue of the lack of the data in Brazil. And with all of this in mind, I wrote a project and I applied to the JSK Journalism Fellowship to work and try to answer this question. How might we help local journalists to better use technology and apply digital methods in order to overcome data deserts? So I spent a year, I went to Stanford, I was selected, and I spent an incredible year in very good company with these folks and the amazing staff from the program researching this question. But I couldn't even imagine that this issue of not having reliable data would become so central for our lives in a few months with the pandemic, right? I was in my last quarter at Stanford when the pandemic hit us, and it became very clear and more evident to me that the lack of proper data can harm our lives in very direct ways. So I started to follow the situation in my country. Of course, I was still in California, but I was seeing that Brazil was becoming quite rapidly the second worst country in the world in number of deaths, right after the US. And now we are in this situation with almost 5 million cases. We have around 150,000 reported deaths, according to the data that we have. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about how we are collecting and presenting this data today. So one of the most reliable sources that we have right now comes from a consortium of media outlets that has been collecting from the health departments in each of our 26 states the data about the coronavirus spread. So how did we get here? Of course, our policies were not very effective to fight the spread of the new coronavirus here, and there are two main reasons for that. One is, of course, the lack of good leadership, who understands the dimension of the crisis we're all facing. And but the dimension that I want to focus on is the lack of well-informed decisions to guide us in the right direction in the middle of this very complex and difficult problem. So our government has been minimizing the depth of this crisis since the beginning and not taking the proper measure to fight the spread of COVID. And since he's not being able to fight the disease, the government decided to fight the data about the disease, especially at the beginning of this crisis. So the federal government, through the Ministry of Health, was supposed to be, of course, the natural source of these figures about the pandemic, but some of the attitudes of the authorities and the president himself put in question the availability and the reliability of data. So activists for open data noticed that the site from the Brazilian government with data about COVID went offline for a few hours in multiple occasions. I received multiple reports from friends who advocate in the open data space, and they told me that the site went offline and came back up with incomplete data sets. So it also took about 2 months for the government to publish breakdowns by city. And in the beginning of June, the official government website for COVID-19 statistics went offline again. And when it came back, it started to report only new cases without showing the total number of infected or of deaths. So the cumulative data about the cases and deaths didn't appear in the website anymore. And 3 days later, after a huge pressure from journalists, from civil society, the federal prosecutor raised some questions, and the government said it would release again the complete data. But then the site that presents the statistics also presented conflicting figures that were corrected just a few hours later. So links to downloads of data in table format, essential for analysis by researchers and journalists, have also been removed from the website. And one thing to highlight for those who are not familiar with the health structure in Brazil, we have a centralized health system that we call SUS. But this system doesn't have a centralized data infrastructure. It relies on the data from the states. So the health ministry was forced to restore the website with the old methodology, with orders from the Supreme Court. But with all this situation, it became clear that the government was trying to distort data to back up an early economic reopening. And also another issue that we had was about the time that they would release the data about COVID cases. So they used to release the data until 5 p.m., but then it was delayed to 7 p.m. and then to 10 p.m., which made very hard for journalists to publish the data in TV and print media. This alarming scenario that we had here, especially the confronting way that the government deal with data to release data for journalists, remind me of the situation in Venezuela with homicides data. So during a pandemic, in the middle of a pandemic, we had our own data desert. And the response of Brazilian civil society was just brilliant. Different groups started collaborative efforts to collect and report on COVID-19 data. And I'll share 3 initiatives that we had in this direction here. First, this guy here, Álvaro Justen. He's a software developer and he's part of School of Data team. And he has a long history of advocacy for open data in Brazil. He tweeted here that since the health ministry doesn't provide data by municipality, he would call a task force to collect this data. And he did it. He gathered about 40 volunteers that worked daily to collect, check, and update data about COVID-19. They created also an API to provide detailed data to the population. And they also built a COVID-19 panel, which you can see here, so that people could see the evolution of cases and deaths by state and also by municipality, including in a map. You can see it in a map as well in this website. And the second initiative was launched by Open Knowledge, the organization I previously led. And they decided to create a transparency indicator to evaluate the quality of the data released by the health departments in the states. So they created a methodology starting from what we should know about the disease to guide public policies, and including things like infrastructure in hospitals, known cases, the number of tests, respiratory equipment. So by understanding that these are the important data, they started to assess the data released by each state in Brazil. Here you can see one of the first assessments that they published. So I don't know, do you see my screen just fine?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
We can see it.
Yeah, for me it's a little bit to the right, but okay. So here you can see this access of the data released by Open Knowledge. And as you probably noticed here, the situation was pretty bad. 90% of states did not publish enough information about COVID-19 in their first assessment. And just 10% of the states published microdata, data with more granularity to be used by researchers. This was early April. So they sent the assessments to public servants in the states, and then 3 months later, the assessment was totally different, which shows that the assessment had a huge impact in the way that the servants were releasing their data. So it improved a lot. And as I mentioned, in a different case, the government decided without any reasonable explanation to delay the figures about COVID, right? So in this occasion, Bolsonaro said that there wouldn't be more stories about COVID in Jornal Nacional, which is the news program with biggest audience in Brazil. And since the government wasn't releasing the data before the program, the journalists themselves started to gather the data in order to report for millions of Brazilians that watch the newscast every night. So interestingly, this issue sparked an unprecedented initiative. Media outlets are usually very competitive, but given the situation, they decided to join efforts in response to the government decision to restrict access to COVID-19 data. And we had a situation in which 6 media outlets formed a consortium and worked collaboratively to gather figures directly from the state health departments. Each news organization publishes the results in their channels, and they have separately operations, of course, but also it calls the public's attention if there is no transparency in the disclosure of data by the state. So it's also a way to assess the disclosure of data by each state in Brazil. So going back to the example of the missing criminal data in Caracas, journalists there were able to find the data and to inform their audience about the severity of the issue. And here as well, with the efforts of civil society, people like Álvaro and journalists, these 6 media outlets, we gathered the data to be more informed about the pandemic. The second case that I'd like to share with you today is about Serenata de Amor. I told you about this project, and I told that it raised for me the issue of the lack of data in the municipal level in Brazil. And I will explain a little bit more about Serenata de Amor, what is this project. And usually the first thing that people ask about the project is why the name is Serenata de Amor. So the name was inspired by a case that happened in Sweden in the mid-90s, when a candidate for the for prime minister was forced to take a 3-year break from politics after it was revealed that she had bought, among other things, 2 bars of Toblerone, which is the chocolate, using taxpayers' money. And we called here Serenata de Amor because it's one of the most famous Brazilian chocolate. So it was inspired by this Toblerone case in Sweden. And what is Serenata de Amor? Serenata de Amor is a project that uses AI to foster social control on public expenses. And as I said, technology is not our goal. It's just a way to engage people in politics. And we have been very successful in this front. Now we have almost 600 people paying monthly to sustain the project. We have more than 700 civic hackers and programmers that help us developing our technologies. So it's a very successful community project. And in our proof of concept, we got the data from the Chamber of Deputies, which has a very good quality. It's updated, it's accurate. And we created our cute bot. This is the bot called Rosie. And Rosie analyzes the data from the Chamber of Deputies, checking the monthly expenses with things like oil, meals, etc. So Rosie, our bot, has to follow some rules, and these rules are based on the rules that the Chamber of Deputies have for them. So we taught Rosie to understand those rules and check what is not in accordance with them. We organized...
Natalia, excuse me, if you can speed up a little bit so that we can save some time for questions, I would appreciate.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
would just go to the point. So with this project, we were able to understand the public expenses in the federal level, but we wanted to go to the municipality level, to the municipal level. And so here we have, let me go here. So we have the next step of our project, which is involving collecting data to work at local level. And this project is called Querido Diário. Our idea is to open the data, which is usually in PDFs today, of the official data from the cities in Brazil, to better understand how they are using public money and how the public expenses are being due. So this is our idea right now, and it's a huge challenge. It's really difficult to gather data from municipalities, especially because we have more than 5,000 municipalities in Brazil. But the idea is that with the civic engagement, and we already have a lot of people, a lot of programmers that are helping us to get this data from PDF to a more open format. With this engagement, we will be able to have and to release the data that is not available today. So just to finish, I believe transparency is the only way for us to keep track of reality and to keep track of the policies that guide our lives. So it is really important for us to understand and to set a higher bar for data collection among civil society and journalists as we face the challenges with official figures like the ones that we see with COVID, and also with the lack of data in the municipal level. And that's it. This is my contact if you want to talk to me or if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for this very interesting presentation. You also touched an aspect of data, really important, about the data deserts. And the Brazilian case that you mentioned is really very interesting in how we overcome this issue. Well, we are running out of time, but we have some questions. What I would like to do is to invite Professor Denise and Alan to open their camera so that we can have you three in the screen, Professor Denise and Alan. Well, thank you so much. I will try to group some questions because they are general, and with that, I would like you to comment and make a final statement. What is the key message you want to deliver regarding the importance of data literacy, data journalism, civic statistics? So with that, I will first, there is a question that is directly addressed to Denise. Let me see. I just missed the question here now. Well, I guess this question is both for Denise and Natalia. Much of the actions from Eduardo Francisco, much of the action to combat COVID-19 must be led by municipal managers, local government. In this sense, case and death data published by municipalities are not useful. Why not publish data at the intra-municipal level, like districts? so that they can act more effectively within their municipality. So maybe Denise and Natalia can touch this point. And do you know COVID-19 data transparency assessment in other countries or comparative analysis among countries? And there is an additional comment, question from Tatiana. What's the relevance of open data for allowing greater transparency and engagement of civil society, sorry. Also, there is a Paula that asked if you would have, if you know, Denise, any online course on this topic. Then also for Denise, does IBGE Educa bring a vision of understanding the geographical space together with understanding of data and statistical methods? Well, so those are more or less a summary of the questions. Maybe I will start with Denise, then Natalia, and finish with Alan, a final remark.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the questions, and thank you also, Natalia, for your talk. And first, regarding the data by districts, I believe that one of the things is we have to understand how the data is produced and collected. So what we understand as districts may not be the same scale that the health ministers or even the municipality use to get data from the hospitals or from the local health surgeons. So sometimes we see the data with our scale of geography, but it's not the data where the administrative work in the inside the council is processed. So it's not always easy to get data by lower levels, even by the head of council of municipality, because it will have the data spread in a different scale or administrative organization. So that's one case, but it can be possible if necessary. And also you may be thinking about big municipalities, but if you think in Brazil with more than 5,000 municipalities, many of them are really very small. So it may be that it doesn't make really the sense of having this big effort. About courses on civic statistics, well, there are several courses that we can put parts of it together. And there are also courses, but they are in English, that are available in this GIST UN hub of the global, international global training space. In Brazil, there are some that are available in the IBGE for using data or using on demography, but really, I wouldn't say that we have one platform with all of them. Also, you can also see if there is something in the NIC, the School of Public Administration. And the other was geography and statistics. So IBGE is really working hard to make this statistical and geographical information work together. So if you go to this IBGE Educa, you can find things with maps and you can find things about statistical evidence, but they are only linked together when the outputs of the surveys or the statistical data are available in IBGE. That's an area that we need to promote to get it more integrated in the future, because that's how the world is doing. And about civic statistics, I think I placed my message. That's not only mine, but it's just to make sure that we have numbers to understand society. That's what all of us, that's what I think.
Thank you very much, Professor Denise. Natalia, do you want to address and make your final remarks?
Yes, I second what Denise just said. And I think someone asked about the importance of open data. And I think with open data, we can actually understand in depth the way that the methodology was applied, the way that the analysis was done, and with that we can have a more accurate results or have more reliability on the results. So without that, if the public release statistics without open data, it's really hard. It makes harder for researchers, for journalists to understand if they can rely on that data. So this is one of the aspects of the importance of open data. But also I would say that we are in a more and more complex society. We need statistics to understand what is going on around us, but also we are facing a huge skepticism around the statistics, around journalism, all the intermediaries that actually help us to make sense of the chaos. So I would say that for us, it's really important to try to understand how to present all of this complexity in a meaningful way to people in the other side of the spectrum, because we have a good amount of literacy and knowledge around around data and around statistics, all these topics that we've been discussing, but we need to make them important to our audiences, important to those who can put pressure on better policies. So how might we rethink our role in this particular scenario? How can we make a better job trying to explain the importance and trying to explain how these statistics can influence people's daily lives? I think this is the key, and Denise mentioned the importance of statistical literacy. If we see even among researchers here, sometimes we have controversies, we have things that are hard for researchers to understand. Imagine a broader audience. So how can we make it more accessible? That's a huge challenge, and I think I can close. I don't have an answer, but I can close with this this question.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Well, Alan, there is a comment on the chat from Tupan about the role of mass media, the contribution, to educate citizens in terms of how to read and how to use data. Maybe it's a good point for you to finish and wrap up this session today.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. And I really enjoyed both Denise's and Natalia's presentations. I think there's a couple of things that we can draw from, I think, all three talks, which is the fact that we are living in a changing world, right? And when we talk about journalism now, we are talking about an industry that's in transition, not just in terms of, can we work with data and can we make the distinction between data and statistical science? Well, that's a very specific question. There are also very fundamental questions for journalists these days, like, can we actually earn a living without selling paper newspapers and in the world of Google and Facebook, right? Like, there are big existential threats to the world of quality journalism, okay? And I think just as there are challenges to the world of academia and into the world of public administration, right? We are living in very difficult times. And I just have one very significant conviction, which is that the future kind of survival of all of these very valid ventures lies in the collaboration and trust between them, right? Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, I certainly experienced from the days of working in the Office for National Statistics a huge degree of mistrust of journalists, so much so that statisticians couldn't speak to journalists everything had to go through the press office. And the press office people actually didn't usually have great statistical literacy, right? Like you had the, you know, but they were hired because they were good press people, right? Like, and so I think you've got this issue here now, which is how can you actually make more discussions between data scientists, researchers, statisticians, and journalists, so that it doesn't feel like you have to talk a foreign language, right? And similarly, I can then have the challenge of, how do I have a conversation with an editor who's worked at a newspaper for 30 years and knows nothing about statistics, and I have to convince him that actually this is the future of journalism. Oh, but by the way, it won't, you know, we won't take your job, you know. So managing change is the single challenge here that unites us all. We have to make sure that there are mechanisms for doing it. And I do see huge kind of opportunities and some sense of optimism. Like when I first saw things like theconversation.com and saw that there was a movement to try and unlock university research for a wider audience, for example, and absolutely, this is what we want more of. You know, we want people to enter into the spirit of mutual collaboration to solve societal problems. And I think coronavirus is the absolute sort of exemplar of that. You know, if you were to design a scenario that said, let's highlight the problems that need fixing, coronavirus has been it.
Sorry, thank you so much, Alan. I couldn't agree more with you. Collaboration and trust are the key, I would say, attitude that we have to do for the future. So I wish we could have more time, but our time is up for today. Thank you so much for your active participation from more than 200 people. It is a pity that participants cannot see the number of participants online, but we had 210. So thank you, all of you. And a special thank to Alan, Professor Denise, and Natalia for your kindness to be with us today. Thank you so much. And tomorrow's session is not to be missed. We will address the topic of alternative approach for data production in the context of COVID-19. I hope all of you will be able to join us again tomorrow. Thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you.